In this video, we will discuss the structures, functions, and appendages of our skin. Our learning objectives for this video are to list several important functions of the integumentary system and explain how those functions are accomplished, to recognize different structures on a model, the epidermis, the dermis, the hair follicle, and different types of glands, as well as to name the layers of our epidermis. So the integumentary system has four major functions: protection, body temperature, excretion, and the synthesis of vitamin D. So protection, regulation of body temperature, excretion, synthesis of vitamin D. And we can break down that protection into a lot of sub-functions. So it protects our body from a lot of things: mechanical or chemical damage, bacterial invasion, UV radiation from the sun, thermal damage, which is heat, desiccation, or drying out. It aids in both body heat loss and retention. So there are different functions for when you start to get hot or too cold that your skin does. It helps us excrete urea and uric acid waste in our sweat, and also synthesizes a crucial vitamin, vitamin D. And there are different structures to support those different functions. So that top layer has keratin, which helps us prevent the desiccation or that water loss. We've got a capillary network that helps regulate the amount of blood on our surface, helping regulate our temperature. Our sweat glands not only help us regulate our temperature, but also help us excrete uric acid and urea. And we've got sensory receptors that allow us to react to our environment for touch, pressure, pain, temperature. The skin itself has two major layers. It's got a superficial epidermis, and beneath it a deeper dermis. Beneath that is a layer called our hypodermis, which is not technically a part of the skin. The epidermis is made of stratified squamous epithelium, and again, it's keratinized. It has lots of keratin to help prevent water loss, and the dermis is that dense connective tissue. And these layers are generally connected, except if you ever get a burn or if they rub together and they get a blister. So the blister is the separating of those two layers from each other, and the middle fills with fluid. So if you've ever had a blister, the top layer above the fluid, that's your epidermis. And if you pop your blister, you're going to expose the dermis underneath. Beneath that, we have our hypodermis, which is our subcutaneous or below the skin tissue, made of adipose tissue. Technically, again, it's not part of the skin, but it does help anchor the skin to the underlying organs, stores that fat, those nutrients, works as a shock absorber, and it helps insulate it, so it helps keep us warm. The epidermis itself has 5 layers. Starting at the very top, we've got the stratum corneum, the stratum granulosum, the stratum spinosum, and the stratum basale. Now, you might say, those are only 4. Well, it doesn't always have 5 layers. It has 5 layers in our thick skin, which is on our palms and our soles, and it has 4 layers in our thin skin, which is everywhere else. The thin skin not only has 4 layers, but it's also where you have hair. So again, if we're in thick skin, then starting from the inside out, we would go stratum basale, spinosum, granulosum, lucidum. That's the layer that's only in the thick skin, and the corneum. The deepest layer, the basale, is the best nourished because it's connected to the blood supply in the dermis. The spinosum and granulosum are flatter cells that are going to make keratin. The lucidum, these are when the cells start to die, and it's only found in thick skin. These also secrete water-repelling glycolipids. So they really help waterproof the skin on your palms and your soles. And then the corneum is a 20 to 30 cell layer thick cornified or horny cells. So these are super keratinized, very waterproof. And cells will start, they'll be made in the basal layer, and they will move up. And as they move up, they get flatter and flatter, and they also start to die. Now, you need to know the layers of the epidermis in order, which is thin skin, which is thick skin. So I suggest you come up with a mnemonic to help you remember. We'll work on this in class. The epidermis has a few other characteristics. It's avascular, so there's no blood supply. Most cells are going to make keratin. Most are keratinocytes, so they're making that waterproofing material. And the nutrients have to diffuse up from the dermis. We make millions of new cells for our epidermis every day in that basal layer, and those daughter cells will push upward and become flatter. And then they flake off in the corneum, creating that dust that covers all of your furniture. And in your lifetime, you'll actually create 40 pounds of corneum, 40 pounds of skin. few other cell types. So not only do you have those keratinocytes, but you have melanocytes, which make melanin in response to the sun. And you'll learn about that in one of the videos. The melanin is then stored in melanosomes, which are taken up by the keratinocytes and help shield and protect their DNA from damage. You have epidermal dendritic cells, which are active immune cells looking around for invaders. And then you have Merkel cells, which occur at the junction between the epidermis and the dermis. And these are associated with our sensory nerve endings. So in the epidermis itself, you're not going to have any sensory receptors, which is why you can peel off kind of the top layer of your skin and not feel anything. If you start to get pain, that's when you know you've hit the dermis. The dermis is a strong, stretchy envelope made of a papillary layer on top of a reticular layer. And they're made of connective tissue of various lengths. The papillary layer is uneven because it has these dermal papillae, which indent upwards, and these contain capillary loops. So this is where the nutrients will go and then diffuse up through the epidermis. Again, this is where we have our pain and our touch receptors. And on your palms, the papillary layer helps form the ridges that make up your fingerprints. Our reticular layer is more irregularly arranged connective tissue, and this is where you have your blood vessels and your glands. So again, if you're bleeding, you know that you've gone all the way through the epidermis and hit the dermis. We also have our lamellar corpuscles, which are our pressure receptors, and we have phagocytes that will eat our invading bacteria. Now, the dermis is kept strong by the collagen and elastin fibers that give it both toughness and elasticity, and the collagen will also help hold in water. As we age, we lose both of these, so our skin becomes all saggy and wrinkled, which is why everyone wants to buy creams with collagen in them to help keep their youthful appearance. Again, the dermis is full of blood vessels. It helps us maintain our temperature. The blood vessels, when it's really hot, they're going to engorge. This makes your skin all red and warm, and that's so that the blood can go to the surface and lose some heat via evaporation. We do the opposite when we're cold. When we're cold, our blood vessels will constrict, they'll get really small, and so our skin will look pale because our blood is flooding our internal organs to try to stay warm. Okay. In this video, we talked about the epidermis and the dermis. You want to take a minute and make sure you can compare and contrast those two layers. In the next video, we will continue by talking about the appendages of the skin.